Live from Toronto, Canada, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio, AM 740.
And welcome to the Audio Imaginarium. Come on in, weary traveler, hang your cloak on a peg, grab a stool, and come gather around the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. Carlos Cagina is the technical producer, and Ryan White is the live stream producer, and we are streaming live on my YouTube channel, Strange Planet. Strange Planet. Tonight, and for the full 2 hours, we're going to be discussing something, well, truly evil. And it exists in our society. It goes on right under our very noses, something that has been ignored for too long and cannot be tolerated in a civilized society. Human trafficking. Human trafficking is a modern form of slavery. It's an extreme form of labor exploitation where women, men, and children are recruited or obtained and then forced to labor against their will through force, fraud, and coercion. Trafficking victims are often lured by false promises of decent jobs and better lives. The inequalities women face in status and opportunity worldwide make women particularly vulnerable to trafficking. And while some trafficking victims are forced to work in the sex trade, many others are forced to perform other types of labor, such as domestic servitude, factory work, or agricultural work. Trafficking victims commonly experience physical and psychological abuse, including beatings, sexual abuse, food and sleep deprivation, threats to themselves and their family members, and isolation from the outside world. And in case you're wondering, it goes on here in Canada too. We'll get some specific numbers shortly, I hope. The International Labour Organization estimates that at least 12.3 million people are victims of forced labor at any given time, 2.4 million of whom toil in forced labor as a result of trafficking. The U.S. Department of State estimates that 14,500 to 17,500 people are trafficked into the United States each year. However, these numbers don't include the many individuals trafficked within U.S. borders. I mentioned Canada. We've seen instances of trafficking for sexual exploitation and labor exploitation. We've seen both Canadian victims and foreign national victims. Shay Invidiata is an award-winning human rights activist, philanthropist, entrepreneur, speaker, and wellness advocate. As a sales representative and director of operations of the Invidiata team, Shay has helped to develop the Invidiata brand into some of the most elite luxury markets and continues to grow the company with her father. Strongly believing in justice and giving back, Shay founded the not-for-profit organization Free Them, one of the nation's leading voices in the anti-human trafficking movement. She's known for her unwavering determination, leadership, and courageous spirit. She never hesitates to hold powerful people's feet to the regulatory fire, especially if it means protecting and improving the lives of others. Shay Invidiata, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And I know it's late for you, so I appreciate you hanging in there for 2 hours. But obviously, this is essential that we talk about it.
It is.
Is there anything before we get rolling here and sort of dive deep into this topic? Anything that you'd like to add to my introduction in terms of human trafficking, just to sort of help set the table so people understand the scope and magnitude of this problem?
Yeah, sure. I think I always like explaining it more from a macro level and bringing it into a micro level. And when you look at globally today, there's over 40 million people that are in global slavery. And, if you don't have $40 million sitting in your bank account, that number for so many of us is hard to contextualize what that actually means. And the current population of Canada, just to put it into perspective, is about 37 million people. If you have people that are listening in even from the U.S., I'll say take the state of California, for instance, over 30 million people. And imagine for a moment that our entire nation of Canada is in some form of slavery. Every single person, all the way from the East Coast, all the way to the West Coast, all of the territories. And 80% are women and children. And in Canada, the two most prevalent forms of human trafficking are forced labor and sexual exploitation. And, you mentioned some other forms of human trafficking. And, of course, that exists. But when we look at in Canada, those are two most prevalent forms. Most people think that, this is an issue that happens outside of our borders, or if they're victims in Canada, that they, quote unquote, must have been brought in from places like Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, across the continent of Africa. And although that does happen in our country, over 87% of victims that are rescued in Canada are Canadian. And so this is a problem that we have right here at home. Globally, it's a $150 billion industry. And again, that number is very hard to contextualize. But today, this illegal enterprise that we're going to be diving in and talking about is greater than the profits of Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon combined. And so you're talking about an illegal industry that has huge power, has huge force. And in my opinion, it is the greatest evil that exists on our planet today. There's many other stats that I could probably give, but I'll share them probably throughout our conversation. But I think for people, it helps to really understand the scale of what is happening in our world. And like you mentioned, that so many people don't realize that it's actually happening, and it's happening right here at home.
The numbers are absolutely staggering. I think it ranks third after the illicit drug trade and the illegal arms trade, if I'm not mistaken. Is that accurate?
It is. It's the fastest growing crime on our planet today. And as you mentioned, it is the largest illegal enterprise next to arms and drugs. And it's the fastest growing because people who are involved in illegal trade have realized that it's actually more lucrative to be able to sell a body than it is arms and drugs. It's also a lot easier. It's harder to hide drugs. It's harder to hide arms when they're illegal than it is a human being. As long as you can control that human and control their body language, you control what they say, what they don't say. Arguably a human is a lot easier to quote unquote make invisible. And the body can be reused over and over and over again. And the average time a body gets rented out is about 15 to 20 times a day. And so if I'm trafficking drugs or I'm trafficking arms and I want to sell you narcotics, you will have to come back to me every single time you want more of that product. And I'm going to have to produce more of that product in order to fill the demand. Whereas the body, you can just keep renting it out and getting more use out of it. And so in Canada, for example, one girl can make a trafficker about $250,000 to $300,000 a year. And so it's highly, highly lucrative. And you start doing the math times 10 girls, times 20 girls, you're in a very, very cash lucrative illegal industry.
Help me understand, Shay. Help me understand how it happens. I don't know if there's a typical sort of scenario, but how does, let's say, a young girl in Canada, let's say she's living in North Bay, how does she fall victim? What happens to her? Walk me through that.
Well, there's many different scenarios that can take place. A very common situation can be, there's different I'm going to say profiles, if you will, of victims. And the first thing to just kind of lay the foundation, I always say to people that wherever you have poverty and vulnerability, you're susceptible to human trafficking. You're susceptible to become a victim. And so anytime you look at a situation, and you mentioned North Bay, where there could be poverty, you're talking about small town, and vulnerability could be many things. Could be lack of education, could be lack of food, could be lack of shelter, could be broken family, could be abuse in the family. Anything that's going to contribute to a vulnerability. And when you're coming from even maybe a better home, those can be insecurities of a girl, of a young girl. So it doesn't actually necessarily mean to be a vulnerability in terms of going hungry. And so a place like North Bay, you're lured oftentimes with a boy or a young man who's going to be between the ages, usually between 18 to 22. And the important thing for people to know as well is that the average age of entry into forced prostitution in Canada and the United States is 13 years old. And so that means that there are too many and so many that are the ages 9, 10, 11, 12 in order to get that number to be as low as it is, to keep that average down to 13. And so, going back again to your scenario in North Bay, girl could be 12 years old, 13 years old, 14, 15, and is going to be approached by a male that's between the ages of 18 to even into their 30s. Oftentimes comes on as a boyfriend figure, and we call it the wooing factor, and that's where the girl is groomed. And sometimes there's an offer for a job in the city to make money, and that, this person will take care of them and provide transportation and make sure they're looked after. And we see this in places like North Bay, up in even the reserves. In Canada, the Aboriginal Indigenous communities are some of the most affected by human trafficking. And so there's oftentimes this, like I said, this promise that, you can make money in the city, and there's job opportunities, and, come with me and I'll give you a job. I'll give you work. And that work is not necessarily realized what it's going to be or how bad it will be, and fully what they're going to need to be doing. The other is the boyfriend approaching them. And, when you meet somebody and you go on maybe call it a first date, or you're getting to know them, what do? You ask them, where are they from? Do you have siblings? What do you like to do? What school do you go to? And freely, most of us give up that information. And so the beginning of that relationship is not under duress. There is no fear. And at the same time that male is telling this female how beautiful she is, how special she is, pours on all of the attention, makes her feel so special, feeling loved, really. Taking her for coffees, buying her clothing. And at some point, that male, who this girl believes is her boyfriend, is going to ask her to do the unthinkable. And will usually put on some form of guilt that he's just spent all of this money on her, and this is what she needs to do for him to help him out, to make some money. It won't last long. It might just be one time, or that she needs to pay him back for everything that he's spent on her. And that switch will get turned, and this quote-unquote loving boyfriend figure that this victim believes is her boyfriend is going to form into her pimp. It's going to form into her trafficker. And as I mentioned in the beginning, that grooming process, that luring and coerce process, you're offering up information. And so, one of the biggest questions that we always get asked is, well, why doesn't a girl just leave? Why doesn't she just walk away? And they get them into such vulnerable positions where they have so much information on these girls. And, sometimes there's families that are being threatened that if you don't do this, then we know where your brother lives. We know where your younger sister lives. We're going to tell your parents. And they've filmed them in very compromising, embarrassing, either positions or just with groups. And they threaten them with exposing them for what they're doing. And so there's a lot of fear that is used to control these girls. And later on, oftentimes very harsh drugs and alcohol is also introduced as a dependency to have to stay with these traffickers, and they form these drug addictions as well.
Shay Invidiata is the founder of the not-for-profit organization Free Them, and the website is freethem.ca. When these children are taken, are they not reported as missing, assuming that they have parents?
Yes, they. Some of them are. Some of them are not. And again, it's complicated because believe it or not, there are too many girls that are still living at home and are being pimped out at the same time. So a girl can be being exploited and trafficked and still coming home to the place that she calls home to put, a roof over her head. She might have parents in the house. And you could have parents that are working 3 jobs to make ends meet. You could have parents that really don't pay any attention. If you come from a bad family, there could be addiction in the home as well, and they're not paying attention to really their children at all. You could have 2 parents that are just, full-time, corporate, super, super busy, and not realizing that their child is being exploited. So there are many of those type of scenarios. The others, absolutely. There are children when they go missing. They are reported. In Canada, there's over 50,000 children that go missing every single year. In the United States, that number is 800,000. And I am 100% convinced that if they have not found the body, that child is alive and is being exploited across the country. I'm very convinced of that. I've been doing this work now for over 17 years, and it's crazy when you start connecting certain dots and what we see. So absolutely, yes, some of them do get reported, but there are too many that don't get reported as well.
I have read in the United States anyway, and I don't know what the situation is in Canada, but foster children can often be extreme or at extreme risk. Why foster children?
Well, again, there's a vulnerability there. They're already lacking in so many ways, right? Imagine being a foster child for whatever reason. Either your parents have died, there's sexual abuse, there's, abuse in general in the home. You've been removed from the place that was supposed to give you safe refuge. And so already, if you're in the system, you have a predisposition that you are vulnerable. And those vulnerabilities, traffickers will prey upon. There are many children in the foster care system that foster care, I refuse to call them parents because that's not what they are to some of these children, that actually pimp out the foster care children. There is a big issue with that in the United States. It does happen here in Canada as well. And the systems need to be doing better of vetting who they are placing these children in short-term and sometimes longer-term foster care.
We have about 2 minutes for to the bottom of the or to the break, Shay. But let me ask you this, and if need be, we'll pick up on it after the break.
Sure.
And that is the recruiting, is the pimping going on in our schools?
Oh, 100%, 100%. Yes, it is. And I mean, we can. It's a longer conversation, but human trafficking is happening in all kinds of schools across Canada. I speak to all different demographics. The youngest kids I've ever spoken to are grade 5s all the way up to university students. And every single time, with the exceptions of the grade 5s, I apologize, with the exceptions of the grade 5s that I've spoken to, but junior high, 7, 8, I've spoken to every grade in high school. Every time I teach on human trafficking and what it is, I have at least one student come up to me afterwards to say, I didn't know what that was called, but this is happening to a friend of mine right now. And I've spoken at Christian schools. I've spoken at all boys schools, at all boys, more affluent schools. I've spoken at all different type of communities, and human trafficking is not, it doesn't know any boundaries. So just
all right, we'll pick up on that when we come back. We'll take a quick time out. Shay Invidiata from FreeThem, the website freethem.ca. More on human trafficking. Stay with us.
The owners of the system are asleep. Now we can play The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Ooh, wow. Look, a shooting star.
Where?
Oh, you just missed it. Gone in a flash.
Oh, I hate when that happens.
Hey, look at that sign.
Nissan flash sale.
Yeah, get up to $1,000 flash cash on select models, August 18th to the 24th.
Wow, you wouldn't want to miss that.
No, you sure wouldn't.
Catch amazing offers at the Nissan Flash Sale, August 18th to the 24th. Visit Nissan.ca or your local dealer. Offer valid when leasing or financing through NCF. Conditions apply.
At Maryland's on Spadina Avenue, the entire store is open just for you. Make a private appointment for you and your sister or you and a friend and have Marilyn as your personal stylist and shopper. She's all yours in all sizes, 2 to 22. Made in Canada. Labels like Joseph Ribkoff and up pants for a thin, credible fit. Maryland's 200 Spadina Avenue. Now open by appointment at 416-504-6777. Leave it to Marilyn to make social distancing fashionable.
It's Tim Hortons Southside Shuffle Blues and Jazz Festival. The free virtual festival this September, featuring the legendary Downchild Blues Band, Finnish blues sensation Iria Littinen, Miss Emily, and the Durham County Poets, plus much, much more. It's a virtual house party, so get ready to dance on the deck, boogie in the backyard, and party on the patio. September 10th to 13th, airing nightly at 8 p.m. For previews and more info, go to southsideshuffle.ca.
Right now, protecting yourself and your loved ones is top of mind. For premium quality face masks without a premium price, discountfacemasks.ca has you covered. Choose from a variety of styles and sizes for every member of your family, from kids to adults. For a limited time, buy 5 masks and get 1 free, plus free shipping. And while quantities last, use the code AM740 at checkout for 2 free filters. Bulk discounts also available. Order today at discountfacemasks.ca.
Take a look around. What do you really see? This is where you can tell all about it. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio.
Shay Invidiata stays with us from FreeThem, the website freethem.ca. We're talking about human trafficking, a modern form of slavery that's happening right under our noses. In fact, although this may be very, very hard to believe, to wrap our heads around, it's happening in our schools. And so you said that you have talked to middle school children, and they know of someone, you've been told, that has been recruited, or that's not even the right word. That's such a a clean, sanitized word, recruited. They have been coerced, obviously is the word, into prostitution. How does this happen in the school? So, I mean, are there fellow students that are pimping? Are there teachers, God forfend? Are there support staff? Who is responsible for coercing these children?
Yeah, it's it oftentimes will happen. Again, your average male that's going to be preying upon these victims is between 18 to in their 30s. So when you look at the high school demographic or junior highs, oftentimes the male that is luring the girls or coercing is coming from outside of those school systems. What is common within the school is having a girlfriend who convinces a girl to say, hey, I have a job opportunity, I've got some way that you could make some money if you're interested. And that's become a more common tactic that's happened, that we see more and more. And it's not that the girl is per se a pimp, like what we would call like a madam, which is a female pimp herself. Oftentimes it is that girl is already being exploited herself, and part of her job that she's being forced to do is to recruit and bring other girls. And in that sense of the word recruit, you chose to use a better choice of words. In this scenario, she is being forced to actually bring in other girls to her pimp, to her trafficker. And oftentimes the trade-off for the girl is that she won't be abused as much if she can, again, pay off her own debt, if she can replace, somebody else to be coming in. And so you will see that very commonly the girl will recruit within the school. And so that's more common happening in the school. Otherwise, when it's the male that is approaching that female, again, mainly from a boyfriend figure, he's outside of that high school, given the ages, oftentimes between, 18 to the 30 kind of range.
And I can only imagine that since the advent of the internet, that this has only exacerbated this problem. How much of the recruiting is now done online? The explosion, I would say, of the internet has been twofold. We have seen, obviously, a huge growth, yet at the same time, too, being that it's online, law enforcement over the years has gotten a lot better on how to track down and actually be able to do sting operations and rescue these girls because it's online. And a lot of the engagements start online. And so you will have COVID operations that take place. When you go to certain websites like Backpage.com, Craigslist, you will see many of these girls they're really sites that solicit for sex. And I prefer to call it what it is. So it's, these men predominantly that are paying to rape or paying to molest these children, the minors. In COVID, we've seen an increase big time due to, people being at home, online. The Pornhub at the beginning of COVID had offered their members free for 30 days. And Pornhub is one of the biggest facilitators of online exploitation. So, during this time of COVID specifically, there has been an increase online, but also in desperation as well, where so many people are, worried about how they're going to provide food on the table, and
for many children, as we know, going to school was their place of safety, was their place of refuge, because the home was not safe. And so when you have now more agitated parents with their kids in the home, if they're already abusing them, stressing out about also finances and food, the child becomes an easy way for them to be able to make money by exploiting them. So we've seen all kinds of stuff taking place over this time. You know, girls that can't pay their rent and their landlords are saying, well, if you sleep with me and you have sex with me, then you can stay in your place. Otherwise, if not, then you need to leave. You know, all kinds of exploitation that is taking place right now.
You mentioned Backpage, and I mean that is a more sophisticated, organized type of organization, and it's gone. But I'm sure you know the CEO and others pled guilty to online sex trafficking. But I'm sure when Backpage went down, 100 more came up in its place. I guess what's troubling to me is, so for example, in the United States, human trafficking wasn't even illegal since before the year 2000. How is that possible? How could we not have had laws in place prior to 2000 that would make this illegal? And what is the situation in Canada? When did it go on the books, human trafficking?
So it's a tricky question for me to answer, because obviously we've had laws for a long time that says that slavery is illegal. And the difference here is that we've introduced a new word calling it human trafficking. And because of that, new legislation and how we and looking at the situation, how we've defined this exploitation now needs a new legislative structure. And so for the longest time, you know, it really wasn't until about 2010 in Canada specifically that we really started to introduce at a federal level legislation that would not only prosecute traffickers, but would actually start to strengthen our laws on this issue of human trafficking.
That was the National Action Plan.
Yeah, that also came after the fact. You know, the first bill that was introduced was Bill 268, which was a mandatory minimum sentence for traffickers caught trafficking minors. And Freedom, we were a stakeholder to that bill, and at the time that was former MP Joyce Smith who put forward that bill. And shortly thereafter, she put together a document. At the time, it was called Connecting the Dots, and it was a national strategy on fighting human trafficking in Canada, because still at that time, you know, this is 2010, 2011, Canada still didn't have a national strategy in place yet. When you go to third world countries like Thailand, whether they're enforcing it or not is a different conversation, but they still had legislation there. And it blew my mind that in Canada, a first world nation where we pride ourselves so much on being free, on freedom, that we did not have this type of legislation in place. And so, of course, you know, we do now, but it's been a journey in Canada, an upward hill battle, and we've been very much behind on where I believe Canada should be, and even today.
Yes, I know. I remember in I guess it was around 2010, that Canada was admonished by the U.S. State Department for lagging behind. And here we think that we are so advanced and sophisticated and civilized in this country, and yet we are, or were, lagging behind let's say the G20, if you will. The major Western industrialized powers. We're coming up on another break, Shay. When we come back, we'll continue to delve into this. I want to talk to you also about I remember producing talk radio in the 90s, and we would have people coming on advocating for legalization of prostitution, and they didn't like them being referred to as prostitutes. They wanted to call them sex workers, and I was never comfortable with that, and I refused to use that because to me that was an attempt to normalize the industry. And now we're seeing who is in fact being coerced into working as prostitutes. So I want to get your take on that as well, and what we can do regarding legislation to clamp down on this scourge, human trafficking. More of my conversation with Shay Invidiata from freedom.ca, the website. Back with more in a moment.
You're listening to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
We asked real Ford owners across Canada what they thought of the all-new 2020 Escape.
My mind was completely blown.
The entire styling I just loved.
When I sat in the Escape, I knew it was the vehicle for me.
It's really exactly what I was looking for.
You said it. Now get it with Ford employee pricing. You pay what we pay. Get over $4,700 in total price adjustments with optional features selected on a new 2020 Escape Titanium. Visit your local Ford store or Ford.ca. Real Ford owners have been compensated for their time.
Magic trick number 9. You know the cranks on your casement windows? The first thing that gets stuck or stripped or has to be replaced? Yeah, been there, done that. Well, Magic Windows just made them disappear. Now our patented Parallax hardware allows you to open or close it just like a door. No crank, no problems. And no other manufacturer in the world offers it. MagicWindow.ca. It's not really magic. It's just better, smarter thinking.
As schools reopen this fall, the health and safety of students and staff is our top priority. Elementary schools will have in-class instruction 5 days a week. The majority of secondary students will start the year with an adapted model of part-time classroom attendance. To keep everyone safe, steps are being taken to maintain physical distancing through the use of social groupings, lunch in classrooms, and limited interaction among students and staff. To learn about other health and safety measures in our schools, please visit ontario.ca/reopening schools, paid for by the Government of Ontario.
We'll do more than help you pack and move, more than unpack and get you set up in your new home. We'll teach you a simpler, more functional way to live. If you're downsizing and facing the chaos of clutter, turn to the Next Step Forward for our expertise and compassion in transitioning. We'll help you throw away the things and hold on to the memories. You can't take it with you, but you can take the next step forward at thenextstepforward.ca.
You're listening to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Shay, before the break, I was mentioning my experience producing talk radio in the 90s, and people would at that time there was this raging debate about we need a red light district in Toronto, and we need to legalize prostitution, and we have to stop referring to them as prostitutes. They're sex workers, and I was never comfortable with that. Because I felt that was just an attempt to normalize what should not be a normal situation. Let me get your take on that. The term sex workers. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it really comes down to what you define as work, and there's two sides of the coin. That it's the oldest profession. Other people will say it's the oldest oppression, which is where my opinion lies. I believe that when you know your own value and worth, and you've been raised truly knowing that who you are and how valuable you are as a human being, the thought of selling your body to make money is just not a thought that you would subject yourself to. And I personally don't know any survivor who has come out of quote unquote, the sex trade or from being exploited through human trafficking who was not sexually abused before they entered the trade. And the most important question for me, and always is when, at what point, how old were you when you pulled what sex workers will call their first trick? And a trick is any type of sexual service that is being done to what they would call a client, somebody who's paying for sex or paying for a sexual service. And we started out our call earlier tonight, and I mentioned that the average age of entry into forced prostitution in Canada is 13 years old. And I will argue to my death that that is never a choice. And that is the makeup of who is in the trade. And so just because a girl might appear to be the age of consent or older, or she actually might be the age of consent or older, does not mean that she was of the age of consent when, to use sex workers the way they would phrase it, pulled their first trick. For me, it's, how old were you when you were first exploited? And it's part of the biggest misconception, I believe, in the sex trade is that when we hear the word prostitute, we equate that word so much to choice. And it's a widely misrepresented term. And the more accurate term to be using is prostituted. And that removes choice from the situation. It removes choice from the circumstance. And so just because a girl is 19, 20, the most important question, like I said, is when did she first enter? And, at 13, at 14, 15 years old, I will argue to my death that's never a choice. And you or some of your listeners might remember years ago, back in about 2013, there was the big case between Bedford, and it was first the province of Ontario.
Yes, that's what I was referring to. She was a regular guest on a talk radio show that I produced, yes.
Yeah, so, she struck down the prostitution laws, and it went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and myself, along with a handful of other very powerful women, strong women who are survivors of human trafficking. We were at Osgoode Hall that day that they were in court, and that decision was made to make a national press statement. And, we were really upset, and we're saying that day to the media that what was not being spoken about in Bedford's case was that she's testifying in court as a 50-something-year-old woman. I think she was 54 maybe at the time. Don't quote me on that, but she was, she was older at the time. And what was not being told is that she was just in her teens. She was about 13 years old when she was recruited by somebody more than double her age, who was abusing her, giving her drugs, and forcing her to basically be raped by men for money, handing over her profits to what she would call her boyfriend. That's not a boyfriend. And so we need to get very clear on our language. We need to get very clear on what the circumstance is and what's not. And Valerie Scott was another person that, was alongside of Bedford, and she was 16 herself. And now, she was in her, late 40s or 50s, wanting to normalize and legalize prostitution. And, that's a very different position when you're in your 40s and you've also been at this point doing this for so long. And the most important question is, when did those two women first enter? When were they first, when did they were forced to put their first trick? And it definitely was not over the age of consent. And, we had an opportunity in that year. The courts gave us 1 year to rewrite the prostitution laws. And Freedom was still is a federal stakeholder to Bill C-310, which was put forward by, at the time, the Attorney General of Canada, the Minister of Justice, Peter MacKay. And we put into legislation, it's still effective today, that looked at Canada and we said, if we recognize that the majority of victims of the girls that make up who's in this illegal sex trade, majority of them are not there by choice. Majority of them are, being trafficked and they're being exploited and sold. And so why are we criminalizing them?
Shay, I've got to jump in here because this is a short segment. We have to take a quick time out. We'll come back and we'll talk about the current law regarding prostitution, where it is now illegal to purchase or advertise sexual services. It's illegal to live off of the avails of prostitution. It is legal to sell sexual services, although in some cases it's illegal to solicit in public areas. So we'll talk more about that. We'll also maybe talk about the Swedish model, whether we should be emulating that. Back with more of my conversation with Shay Invidiata as we continue to discuss human trafficking, modern-day slavery. Don't go away.
You're listening to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Alpine credits.
Yes, it's your English teacher, Mrs. Nelson.
Uh-oh.
You've been using the word approved quite a lot lately.
True, but...
You know there are alternatives like accepted, authorized, confirmed, validated. Let's try. I own my home and would like a loan.
Accepted-ated.
Alpine credits, where homeowners get endorsed, confirmed, permitted, allowed, okayed, and approved. Some conditions apply. Alpine credits.
FSRA license 12616.
With Ontario opening back up, staying safe and healthy is essential. And home care is here to help. Home care workers like nurses, PSWs, and therapists are compassionate, specially trained caregivers whose goal it is to keep you healthy at home, because your home is safe and it is where you want to be. It's your home, your health, and your care. Let a qualified home care professional come to you. Visit choosehomecare.ca to learn more.
During the pandemic, we've all seen changes in how art, artists, and culture have helped to keep us connected, entertained, and looking forward. Our theaters aren't open yet, but if you're in a position to do so, consider making a donation to the local cultural organizations and artists that you love. And if you haven't seen our online work yet, check it out at soulpepper.ca. A message from Soul Pepper and Zoomer Radio.
Is it me, or do our floors look tired and beaten?
Well, we have been home a lot lately. You're right, they could use some sprucing up.
We can go to Pollock's Carpet Market for new flooring.
Right again.
Pollock's has many styles at excellent prices. The biggest deals on Roncesvalles.
Now that brings a smile to my face.
And a facelift to our home.
Is it me, or are we looking forward to spending a lot more time here?
Get great flooring at great prices and installation, too, on Roncesvalles Avenue.
Pollock's Carpet Market.
Take a look around. What do you really see? This is where you can tell all about it. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio.
Shay, before the break, I was, as I understand it anyway, sort of reciting the current legislation, which came around, I think, in 2014 regarding prostitution. That is, it's illegal to purchase or advertise it. It's illegal to live off the avails of prostitution. So pimping is illegal. It's illegal to advertise it, as I said, but it's illegal to sell, but you can't solicit in public areas. Is that do I have that right?
It's not illegal to sell sex. It's illegal to purchase it.
Right. I thought it's legal to sell, but it's illegal to solicit in public areas.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well, you can in public areas, but there are restrictions, like obviously like around like schools or within children. Those type of precautions and protections are in place. But people ask, like why did this law, which for some people, they don't think it makes sense because you're able to sell the service, it's illegal, but the service itself to purchase is illegal. You know, and as we were starting to talk about, we looked at who was selling and why they're selling. And at the time in Canada, the only way for a police officer to remove a girl was to, and be able to detain her, was by laying charges and to arrest her. And of course, when you get those charges also laid, you know, you get a criminal record. And once you have a criminal record, that is a whole other horrible process for a victim, especially when they, you know, are rescued and are on their journey of healing, that they now have a criminal record. And so we looked at that to say we need to remove that and put the police in a position of empowerment to be able to actually go into a situation, remove a girl who's willing to go and who wants help, and have the legal authority to be able to do that. And then, of course, at the same time, not criminalizing these girls who are being forced to be there and who are being exploited. And what we need to be doing is going after the demand, which is exactly what Bill C-310 aimed to do. And so the Johns, which are just, you know, somebody who's purchasing sex, it is illegal to do that in Canada.
And what is the penalty currently under Canadian law for a John?
It really depends on the situation. So that's the more complicated thing for me to try to answer. You know, simply it goes down into silos. It goes down into the province, even down into the municipalities as to what they are allowed to do. There's certain regions where they will have to go to John school and they can have their sentence reduced. There's, you know, it's complicated. Honestly,
in your mind, are the penalties sufficient? In your mind, are the penalties sufficient?
Correct. Yeah.
No, but I'm asking, in your mind, are the penalties sufficient in that area?
Oh, sorry. My apologies. No, I don't think, not just this one. I think in general, I still think that when you look at what happens to a victim, regardless of even length of time, the penalties that we have in our country and how our system is set up, where there's so many different credits and a sentence can be, you know, 8 years, and then it can end up being reduced to only a couple of years. And then all of a sudden that person who's victimized you is quote unquote free and is going to be out. And yet that victim then lives in fear, for not only their trafficker coming after them, but then the trauma that they also live with for the rest of their life. So no, across the board, I don't think that our penalties are severe enough to.
Right. You were talking about the trafficker, but what about for the John that purchases the services? What are the penalties?
It's both the same. I think that if you had harsher sentences, you know, it would really demotivate somebody from being able to go out and purchase, you know, a person. It would, we don't have a culture that is structured as such. And we're seeing this isn't even at like the street level, but we're seeing now more than ever in our world, right down from the street levels to gangs to more organized crime to different elite groups. You know, politicians for many, many years, but more the depth of people in very high places that are, you know, are purchasing, and what happens to them when they get caught? Not a lot. And that's not okay. And the system is not set up to discourage that and also hold those people accountable. And
we'll definitely get into the Epstein case in the second hour. So we just have a few minutes here before the top of the hour. Again, I'll start this conversation, and if need be, we'll continue after the top of the hour. But so when a John is arrested, and what are the police instructed to do? Do they take the woman into temporary custody to try and counsel, or to provide some sort of a safe haven? Do they then try to identify who the pimp is and go after that individual?
Yes to both. They will, after coming into the station or with the police officer, if there's not already a social worker on site, or what we would call like a frontline worker that's equipped to deal specifically with human trafficking victims, they will be called to the scene, or they'll be called down to the station to meet the girl, or the officer will take her directly to a safe house. So it just depends on the scenario.
And how difficult is it often to get the woman, the victim in this situation, to testify or to give up her pimp? How often do they do that, or are they willing to do that?
Yeah, so, again, the system needs a lot of improvement. There's many factors as to why a girl would, it's not that she wouldn't be willing. There's really a lot more to do with being afraid. Right. Afraid for your own life, that just because your pimp might be actually put behind bars. As I mentioned, there's the fear that what happens when he gets out. But also, too, just because he's behind bars doesn't mean that he doesn't have other people that can come and find her. And so, there's extreme fear that if she talks, not just herself, but if she does have family and loved ones that are still around and alive that her trafficker knows of, that serious harm might come to those people. There's also the brainwashing that takes place from a female who, at a young age, at the beginning, as we talked about at the very beginning of tonight, that the introduction to your relationship with the trafficker is not one of a trafficker. It's a boyfriend luring, grooming process that happens. And so the brainwashing that happens is that, you are still identifying with this pimp. Oftentimes the victims are identifying these men or the boys as their boyfriends. And it's a real thing, the trauma bond that forms. And sometimes these girls will not want to testify. And it's not until years later that when they've gone through a lot of trauma counseling and a healing journey, that they'll look back and realize that person that they called their boyfriend was truly, in fact, exploiting them and pimping them out, that they were, trafficking them. And
all right, we're going to take a time out here. We'll come back. Shay Invidiata stays with us for the second hour, as well as we continue to discuss human trafficking, modern-day slavery. The website is freethem.ca. We'll find out more about the organization and other forms of human trafficking as well. My name is Richard Syrett. Don't go away.
You're listening to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.